A lot of you may not know this, but I was actually an NES kid growing up. I was playing stuff like Super Mario Bros., Contra, Castlevania, Zelda, and Rygar for all it was worth, and loved every minute of it. Among these classics was also Ninja Gaiden, the action platformer from Tecmo. Me and my buds called it Ninja Gaiden back then, because well, none of us knew what the hell a Gaiden actually was. It had been one of the best games I had ever played. It was cinema heavy and had a soundtrack from the 8-bit gods. It was also one of those games that could be crazy difficult in the final stages. My best friend Tyrik and I played it hardcore, trying to be the first one to have bragging rights by defeating it. We traded it back and forth for days and weeks at a time, and to this day, it remains one of my very favorites. A couple of sequels hit the NES as well, and they too were some pretty good games. But while I was enjoying the 16-bit era in 1992, something happened I wouldn't know about until years later. Sega actually scored the license from Tecmo to do an exclusive version of Ninja Gaiden for their Master System. It was developed internally by Sega CS and Sims, and released in Europe, Australia, Brazil, and Korea. It was one of the many pieces of software I would miss because of the Master System's premature demise in the United States, but I was gonna find a way to play it so I could see what all the fuss was about. In this episode, we will be looking at the Master System version of Ninja Gaiden, talk a bit about its quality, and I'll give you an opinion on whether or not it's worth playing now. I hope you guys enjoy Ninja Gaiden for the Sega Master System. Like the NES version, Ninja Gaiden on the Master System is cinema and story heavy. There is an opening, segments between stages, and an ending that goes deep into the lore of this alternate universe side story. You are Ryu Hayabusa, and your village is attacked, your people slaughtered, and the Bushido, a powerful magical scroll, has been stolen. Along with your dragon sword, you have to get it back and save the world from certain destruction. When you start Ninja Gaiden, you are treated to core gameplay that doesn't feel too dissimilar to the NES games. You run and jump, and your base attack is your sword. You can get secondary items like ninja stars, fireballs, fire wheels, and health replenishment. There are some notable differences here, however. First, our Sega-bred ninja can only grab ledges from the bottom and swing upwards, as opposed to the vertical surfaces of the NES version. You can also do this in reverse and swing downwards from a ledge, a useful trick for grabbing out-of-the-way items. A wall jump rounds out your basic skill set, and it's one you're gonna have to master pretty quickly because it can save you some serious frustration in later stages. Secondary items need endpoints to use, or what the instruction manual calls combat points. Each one uses a different amount, and you can replenish these points by picking up scrolls. Other items include score points if you're into that sort of thing. There is also a bomb attack that clears the screen, but you can only use these at the cost of some of your life. Another thing you'll notice about the Master System version here is that it uses both traditional side-scrolling for its levels, as well as a screen switching style that can be somewhat jarring until you get used to it. Most of the challenge you'll face is based on the platforming segments, which does have numerous areas where you can fall off the screen and die, as well as enemies strategically placed to knock you into them. Enemies can be in plain sight, but many are in areas that are hidden just off the screen, waiting for you to jump their way. It's also important to note that the Master System game here is entirely unique, and shares nothing in common with the NES version in regards to stage design, enemy assets, or boss encounters. This is not a reskin or a remake, it's an entirely exclusive entry. First impressions are important with video games, and this one nails it when it comes to the visuals. This is a heck of a good-looking 8-bit action game. The opening stage is a nice-looking forest with lots of shadows in the backdrops and shaking leaves here and there. That transitions to a brightly colored city, and each stage afterwards keeps up with the variety and the nice color variation. It's a far prettier game than the NES edition overall, and that's mostly thanks to there being so much more color. When similar environments are compared, quite frankly, the Master System game just blows it out the water. The main sprite is also animated well, and you'll see new enemies in each and every stage. It does lack some of the wow moments that the NES version conjured up with its incredible cinemas. I don't know what demon the Tecmo devs did favors for to get those moments, but Sega was unable to equal them here. On the plus side, the storyboards still look great, and they add a lot to the overall presentation. All in all, it's a great looking game that looks similar enough to the other entries to not be off-putting, while retaining enough of its own flair to be respectable as a standalone product. In fact, I'd go so far as to say it's one of the platform's better looking games and a real testament to just how great later developed Sega Master System games could look. One area where the NES version really hit home with me was its incredible soundtrack. I mean, the stuff in the original NES Ninja Gaiden is epic, and easily some of the better music that console ever produced. If you're expecting the same kind of magic here, you will unfortunately be disappointed. Nothing in the Master System game is going to dethrone the unforgettable tunes that Tecmo blessed the first NES game with. That said though, don't for a second think this is a bad soundtrack. Most of what's here fits each stage, and had a great rhythm and flow to it, and easily stands up to comparisons with other games in the genre. A couple of these rival some of the tracks from the GG Shinobi in fact. Let's have a listen to a few of them so you can make up your own minds. Like the NES Ninja Gaiden, this one can be quite a challenge. Early stages are a breeze thanks to the low damage enemies that you can just plow right through, lots of health restoration, and nothing that's super cheap. That all changes about 3 levels in, where things start to get a bit harder. Enemies have the Mega Man syndrome, which means just scrolling the screen a bit and those bastards respawn and are right back on top of you. The NES version did this as well, and it can lead to some terribly frustrating deaths. Like most titles that do this, you can get used to it with a little bit of practice, and you'll get familiar with the cheap pop-up enemies that are placed perfectly to knock you into holes for insta-deaths. This is 8-bit game design 101, however, and it was a staple that many developers used to make these games really hard when you first played them. The trade-off was that once you get familiar with it and good enough at it, you could literally beat the entire game in a straight run in about 30 minutes with only a handful of deaths. This one also has infinite continues, which helps water down its difficulty tremendously. Had the developers nailed you to a wall with limited continues, this game would have been so hard, I doubt I could have defeated it without losing my mind. One weakness I was a bit disappointed with were some fairly tame boss encounters. These guys often only have a pattern or two to recognize, and if you are properly weaponed up, you'll likely steamroll all of them. The combat points actually become infinite once you collect 999 of them, so save your secondary attacks and you'll have zero issues with any of them. Again, had the developers not included this feature, this game would have been so very much harder. Perhaps one of the most confusing things about Sega's Ninja Gaiden games is the fact that there are actually two of them that were officially released at retail. The one we've been looking at here was of course the Sega Master System version that was not released in the US or Japan. But there is another one, a 1991 Game Gear release that came to every major region and is completely different. I was familiar with that one, though at first I thought this was the same one that appeared on the Sega Master System. Hell, I still get the two mixed up sometimes, especially the developers responsible for them. This one is actually a decent game too, so if you were going to try out one, I definitely recommend the other as well. Heck, if you're into messing around with unreleased software, Sega was even working on one for the Sega Genesis that never saw the light of day. One thing that people don't realize about Sega is that they had to make their own versions of many games back then. Nintendo had all the power thanks to a dominant monopoly in Japan and the United States, often leaving Sega's only real option to license a property and develop it themselves, or get someone to develop it for them. There are a great many Sega Master System and Genesis games you may think are from the actual companies that hold the license, but are actually from Sega's own internal development teams. This is the frame of reference that Ninja Gaiden here fits into. Tecmo had no plans to do it themselves, so Sega took the initiative. The end result was a title that cut its own path and gave owners of the Master System something very much worth playing. Overall, I still prefer the NES game for a number of reasons, primarily its music and incredible intermissions. They wowed me on a level that the Sega Master System game never did, probably because I played it so far after the fact. This was often the case with many Master System games for me. That machine's story is a tale of different regions getting very different experiences. While Europe and Brazil got software for years, the US and Japan saw nothing but failure and abandonment. It's a story that repeats itself all too often in Sega's history, and it's a real shame games like Ninja Gaiden got to be enjoyed by so few. Thankfully, we had Shinobi to rely on, and he kicked plenty of ass himself. If you were one of the ones left out in the cold and missed this version, be sure to give it a try. If you like action games with plenty of pizzazz, I think you're gonna love it. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time. One of the highlights of owning an NES back in 1989 had been Tecmo's Ninja Gaiden. Of course back then everyone called it Ninja Gaiden. It was a side-scrolling action platformer that had you battling an ancient evil while searching for your father's murderer. It was loaded with great cinematics, the music was unforgettable, and it's one of the most difficult games on the platform. But the series began life as a much different arcade title. Released the year before, Ninja Gaiden Arcade had been a beat-em-up with wildly different mechanics and visuals. To further complicate the matter, Sega began releasing its own take on the Ninja Gaiden formula, starting with the 1991 Game Gear release by Japan's System House. Outside of a few moves and power-ups, it was very different in gameplay, visuals, and sound to the Tecmo Arcade and NES editions. Sega turned the series on its head once again with the Master System version in 1992, a co-op project between Sega CS and Sims. Completely different from its Game Gear cousin, this one again had a few similar moves, but was otherwise a brand new experience. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the Game Gear version of Ninja Gaiden, see how it differs from what you may know of the series, and see if it's worth playing today. I hope you guys enjoy my review of Ninja Gaiden for the Sega Game Gear. The story here is quite a bit different from what we had seen in previous renditions of the game. This focuses on your dragon sword and the enemies attempting to steal it. That sets you on a journey to discover why and who is behind it all. The gameplay from there is pretty typical action fare. Enemies run, jump, and pop out from all corners and sides of the screens. Fortunately, you have many ways to deal with this. Your standard attack is a sword that is fast and has an impressive reach. There are also secondary weapons that use various amounts of force points. This includes ninja stars, a vertical energy wave, a heat-seeking energy ring, and a scatter shot. Also spread about the stages are herbal pots for health replenishment, and invincibility that surrounds you in a ring of fire, orbs and scrolls that give you more force points, and a standard 1-up, or what appears as a heart for extra lives. Most of the stages scroll horizontally left and right over some light terrain for you to negotiate. There is an instance of vertically scrolling action, and of course, each area ends in a boss encounter. The Game Gear Ninja Gaiden is a short adventure, having only 5 stages, and can be easily beaten in 25 minutes or so. One area where this game does a really nice job is its visuals. The sprites are well defined, the backdrops are clean and detailed, and there's never any doubt what you need to do in a boss battle. Like many games on the platform, it's also colorful, and all the on-screen enemies are quite distinct from one another and the backdrops they're set against. A few of the boss characters are huge and have multiple forms, adding to the visual pizzazz. This was done on a tiny 1 megabit cartridge, which is almost certainly why the game is so short. The stage and enemy variety is impressive, but it ends in just 5 stages thanks to the tiny ROM size. It's pretty, but a short burn that will leave you wanting more. The music has always been an important part of the experience in these games, and the Game Gear version here has some decent tunes. It's not on the same level as the NES version, but solid nonetheless. Its biggest issue is its variety and the amount of it. Like the stages themselves, every track here is short and can actually repeat during the gameplay. In fact, the entire thing has a runtime of just 11 minutes. That includes every stage, the title screen, and the boss music. That should give you some idea of just how lean the content is overall. I do have a few selections for you, so you can get an idea of what you'll be listening to. Having this title on the Game Gear back then was a godsend. While simple, it looked good on the small screen and was close enough to the other Ninja-based software at the time to hold its own. The action was fast, the screen scrolled smoothly, and the secondary items added enough variety to the gameplay to make everything feel just like it needed. But there is no question at all that this game has a huge content problem. As I alluded to multiple times already, Ninja Gaiden on the Game Gear is short. And I mean damn short. There are indeed 5 stages, but one of those is essentially little more than a boss fight, and 3 of the other 4 are extremely short. The final stage does offer some length and a challenging final fight, but even the most average gamers among us should be able to defeat this with little more than an afternoon's play session. There's just so little here to come back to after it's done. Even for a portable title, it's pretty short. I also absolutely hated the way you take damage. There is no period of invincibility once you get hit, so under the right circumstances, enemies can actually juggle you for multiple points of damage. In some cases, I've had entire life bars stripped away thanks to being stuck in an endless juggle. These shortcomings really are unfortunate. For as good as Ninja Gaiden is on the Game Gear, and I want to stress it's still a very fun game, it really did need 2 or 3 more stages the music to go along with those, and a tweak to get rid of the ridiculous juggle damage mechanic. You do that, and this goes from a decent game to an unmissable classic. The developer behind this was Japan System House, who was responsible for the Game Gear Streets of Rage titles. And I honestly don't know why Sega only gave these guys a single megabit to work with. It's not like this was some budget release for $19.99. This was a full retail product at $40 freaking. Even the original NES version had been 2 megabits, and that was years earlier. This actually seemed to be a problem that would dog many Sega titles in the early to mid 90s. Projects would be completely hamstrung by small ROM sizes that limited asset variety and other important parts of the game. I don't want to come off like I'm hating on Ninja Gaiden. I really do think this is a solid experience, but there is no question that it's short on content and over entirely too soon. The Master System version was afforded a 2 megabit cart, has more stages, enemies, music, and bosses, and was roughly the same price. There's no excuse why this game ended up being just a blip on the Game Gear fans' radar instead of being something they had to own. The mechanics and visuals were there to be so much more. But for all the bitching and complaining I've done in this video, I still highly recommend you give it a go. It's fun while it lasts, and it's good enough for a few follow-up play sessions. The only thing that sucks is that it's guaranteed to leave you wanting more. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.